Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 18th of September 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, Mike Robinson. As so-called terror events unfold, child abuse becomes a more important subject, apparently. We take an in-depth look at some activities by the police.
Before we do that, there's somebody outside with a bucket, Brian.
Indeed.
Not sure whether he's a terrorist or the window cleaner, but he is wearing a red hat, which is possibly a dangerous thing to do because, according to the Times, the Parsons Green terror subject was arrested because he was wearing a red hat, like the one caught on CCTV. So this seems to be the level of evidence required these days. You wear a red hat, you are a terrorist.
Or you wear a red hat, you could be picked up as a suspect. I mean, how many thousand red hats get worn across the country? A lot.
Yes.
A lot. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we're not interested in Parsons Green because it was such a ridiculous event in and of itself that we're not going to cover that. But what we are going to do is look at some of the fallout from it. Back in June, Theresa May and the Home Office pushed out a new commission for countering extremism. This was just early June rather, and this was part of the Queen's speech that they were going to create this commission for countering extremism. It was going to be set up to, quote, support the government in stamping out extremist ideology in all forms. Does that mean it's going to stamp itself out? And it said that it was going to be given the task of supporting the police, the public sector, civil society in promoting pluralistic British values and reducing tolerance of extremism. And to do that, the Commission would be expected to build partnerships with all those opposed to extremism, disrupt the most dangerous extremists, and build cohesive communities. So it's not just about stopping extremism, actually it's about developing the common purpose and building cohesive communities.
Lots of news speak there, Mike.
And despite all that about stopping extremism, this was the tweet on screen at the moment that they pushed out. And the image in the tweet is of police, counter-terrorist police in their black hats and their goggles and their big guns. So I just thought it was a little bit ironic that the Commission for Countering Extremism would be demonstrating its intent, or the Home Office rather, would be demonstrating its intent by having some extremist police officers on screen.
Yeah.
Yes.
There is a nose visible in that picture, so perhaps you'll be identified by your nose.
Possibly. I don't see any red hats. But anyway, why are we mentioning this? Because this took place in June. Well, because today the government has announced that it is committed to tackling extremism in all its forms, and therefore it's launching an effort to recruit the countering extremism commissioner. So that recruitment drive starts today. The commission is going to also, by the way, is going to help train schools and colleges to spot the warning signs and stamp out extremism, as they've done with racism, apparently. And because there's a strong correlation between extremism and the poor treatment of women and girls, the commission will have a specific responsibility to ensure women's rights are upheld.
Well, wait a minute. Are they saying women and girls have become the terrorists because their rights have been...
I don't know. But here's what Amber Rudd had to say. The government is committed to tackling extremism in all its forms, as the Prime Minister said after the London Bridge attack earlier this year. Enough is enough. The new Commission for Countering Extremism will have a key role to play in this fight. It will identify and challenge tolerance of extremism, tackle extremist ideology, and promote British values, learning the lessons from the struggle against racism in the 20th century. The lead commissioner will head up this vital work, and I look forward to working with the successful candidate. Yes, let's move on, because it doesn't end there. £24 million more is going into counter-terrorism policing, this is fantastic. Amber Rudd had plenty to say about this as well. She said, we have seen several devastating terrorist attacks in quick succession. She did mention Parsons Green in the same breath. And the police have responded to this challenge outstandingly. That's why we're reviewing our counter-terrorism strategy. So she's obviously so confident about the activities of the police that she's decided to review the counter-terrorism strategy.
Well, this is interesting. We'll be coming on to activities of the National Police Chiefs Council. They've been talking about terrorism, of course, and they're very concerned because they're not sure if they can get enough armed police officers, because at the moment, to become an armed police officer, you have to be a volunteer. And clearly they're a little bit uncomfortable with the fact that people may say, well, actually, we don't want to be armed, because that could upset the government's plans on that one.
But even better news, Brian, it gets better, because today Metro, this story originated with the Daily Star, but Metro here, the headline is armed S.A.S. troops deployed on underground trains in disguise as couples. So what are they saying? They're saying armed special forces troops are being deployed on the London Underground with orders to shoot to kill, according to sources. Some of the members of the S.A.S. and Special Reconnaissance Regiment will be in disguise, with some even posing as couples, according to the Daily Star. The trained Special Forces operatives will be armed with Glock 9mm semi-automatic pistols and have been trained in covert operations at the S.A.S. base in Hereford. A source told the Daily Star the task force is comprised of some of the most experienced Special Forces personnel in the Army. The unit is comprised of some of both male and female personnel from the Special Reconnaissance Regiment who are trained killers and can pose as couples while travelling on public transport. So let's try to understand this. Apparently we've now got special forces on the London Underground with Glocks. Some from the Special Reconnaissance Regiment, male and females, are going to be running around arm in arm, but they're trained killers, Brian, and they're going to kill us on the train.
Well, it seems that trial by jury has definitely gone out the window, train window, presumably. We were actually contacted earlier this morning by a former Special Forces individual who pointed out that while, yes, there may be some of these people operating on the underground, most of that article was hype. It was hype about the fact they're trained killers. Well, they're Special Forces personnel, so they will be trained in killing, as will anybody who's in the military as a whole. It commented on the article commented on the weapons, to which this individual said, well, how can they possibly know what weapons they're going to be armed with, because that's hardly likely to be released. And the fact that, yes, these are arch-trained killers. So the assessment by a former Special Forces individual was that this was very much a hype article designed to sort of spread fear amongst people, which I thought was interesting, coming from somebody who'd served in one of these units themselves.
Well, I have to agree with that, but not just to spread fear, of course, to gauge public reaction, because, of course, what they're wanting to do, I think, is try to encourage people to accept more and more arms on the streets in the hands of the state.
Yeah, and police slant paramilitary, basically.
Absolutely, as we see this merging between military and policing these roles. We're seeing this through policy. So, we know that they're watching social media. They'll be gauging public reaction.
Indeed. Well, we should continue to dig into it. And today we decided to get into the subject of the National Police Chiefs Council. Now, remember that this is an organisation where the police get together and decide themselves what their policing policies are going to be. It took over from the Association of Chief Police Officers, which was doing the same thing as a private company. So if you really start to ask the questions about what this organisation is and how is it accountable to the general public, it's not entirely clear. I've been fascinated by the logo. I've just got to drop this in some time, because to me that's a lighthouse. The checkered blue and white, supposedly the police, and the crown on top seems to me to be a lighthouse. And of course, common purpose is Middle East drive is called Al-Fanar, which I believe is lighthouse as well. Just an interesting little point, but a lot of work goes into logos. Well, here's the headline from Commander Matt Twist: the use of force data is a great step forward for transparency. Now, what this article claims is that the police are going to release details about where they have used force, and it's very important that the public knows this. Now, I'm going to ask the question, Mike, does the public need to know this because it's going to help keep them up to date with what the police are doing, or do the public need to know this? Because knowing what force the police are using can be intimidating. But if we come back to that slide, let's just bring in this, which I found absolutely fascinating. It was this paragraph here. If we bring that in on screen, police are charged with maintaining order and keeping people safe. In fulfilling those duties, they will sometimes need to use force on behalf of the state to protect the public and themselves from harm. Now, when we discussed this earlier, you said this is straight out of the sort of National Socialism. The state is going to use force to protect you. There's something deeply unpleasant with the language these people are using and where they're taking us. But I encourage people to go on to the NPCC site and read this article for themselves, and you can decide what you think. But there we are, to use force on behalf of the state to protect the public and themselves from harm, because we can't do that ourselves.
It demonstrates a fundamental change in thinking. His thinking and the relationship between individuals and the state has been changed in some direction. I think we've been hinting, or in fact doing more than hinting about this for a very long time. Of course, the police are supposed to operate on behalf of the public, not on behalf of the state.
Yeah. Well, let's see what the police are up to. This was a very good headline from the Telegraph. Police forces might work with vigilante paedophile hunters. Now, in the article, they go to data obtained by the BBC, which showed there was an increase in the number of cases where evidence gathered by paedophile hunters is being used. And the statistics said that more than 44% of cases of crime meeting a child followed by sexual grooming use this evidence. So there's fear here that the work of the general public to find out what's going on in the paedophile and grooming industry is now beginning to result in convictions, and there's a little bit of uneasiness. Now, this gentleman is quoted in the article, Simon Bailey. He's the National Police Chiefs Council lead on child protection. And he said this: these paedophile hunter vigilante groups are putting the lives of children at risk. I'm not going to condone these groups. I would encourage them all to stop, but I recognise that I'm not winning that conversation. So I was just fascinated that the people who maybe somewhat crudely, maybe not always in the best possible way, are shining a spotlight on people who are grooming children are actually the people putting the lives of children at risk. How do you think he got to that? How did he think that idea through, Mike? I find it tricky.
I'm not clear. So you know, these people are operating in a vacuum in the sense that the police aren't doing their jobs in this regard. So people have stepped into the vacuum to take up the role. And he is now saying that he's encouraging them all to stop. So he doesn't like the fact that people are actually investigating on their own behalves.
And being quite successful, so successful that their evidence can actually put people into court and get convictions.
Yes.
So Simon Bailey, an interesting man, but he goes on, of course. When asked whether the police could work with vigilantes, interesting terminology, he said, I think that's something we're going to potentially have to look at, yes, but it comes with some real complexity. This is a very interesting man, and he becomes more interesting when we have a look at this quote from him. This is not from that particular article. Paedophiles who view indecent images but go no further should not be jailed but rehabilitated. So the people who are actually trying to track down people grooming children, he feels are the ones putting children's lives at risks. But if you're somebody who's viewing indecent images but you don't go any further, then we don't want to jail you. You should be put through a rehabilitation program.
Even calling them indecent images is particularly soft.
Is particularly soft, yeah. Well, let's bring in the BBC, because that's always a good place to go. And this was the BBC article that where we obtained that quote from Simon Bailey. Apparently, police forces cannot cope with a huge rise in reports. And there we have an NSPCC study late in 2016 suggested the number of individuals looking at such images could exceed 500,000. So we've got a national problem here, but don't worry, we just want to put these people through a little bit of re-education. There are undoubtedly tens of thousands of men that are seeking to exploit children online with a view to meeting them, with a view to raping them and performing the most awful sexual abuses on them. Sorry, there's a bit of text in there which shouldn't be there. Offenders who viewed online abuse images should be placed on the sex offenders register, cautioned and managed in the community. Well, we can't manage the community at the moment, Mike, but we're going to make sure we know people who could pose a danger are put back in the community where they can be an even further risk. Referrals to rehabilitation increasingly are effective, he said, and not using the courts system would speed things up. Whose side is this man on?
Well,
I've got a very
an apologist for
child abusers. Yeah. That's the way it seems to me. And remember, all of this is being debated in the National Police Chiefs Council, which in essence is unaccountable, because if they decide that material they're discussing is restricted or secret, then it's not made available to the public. And let's have a look at this one. We've got another article here, and we've got this gentleman, Chief Constable Alec Wood. What he's doing in this video on the NPCC site is giving an update on police and fire service collaboration. Now remember that this has been proceeding apace for some years now, but the idea is massive integration of the police and the fire service and parts of the ambulance service. So we're bringing it all together under very tight state control. So this is being pushed by the Police Chiefs Council. But the article went on to say this: NPCC works closely with a range of organisations, including College of Policing, National Crime Agency, Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, and the Home Office. But it's a global world. However, these relationships can no longer begin and end with our physical borders. For the first time ever, Chief Constables Councils hosted a serving FBI director. And who was that? Well, it was none other than James Comey, to discuss encryption and the challenges posed by modern technology. Now, I don't know what our audience think of Mr. Comey, but when I followed events in America and saw the appalling testimony that he gave in front of the Congress Select Committees, I wouldn't trust him with my pet hamster. We now see him attempting to make money out of his knowledge of the political scene in the States through a book. And yet this is the man being brought in behind closed doors in order to help decide Britain's police policy. I feel very uncomfortable about that, but it gets worse. And let's bring in the Chief Constable herself, Sarah Thornton. And this is some video comment she made in 2016. We talked in NPCC Council about some of the most serious threats where we really need to come together as police forces to deal with child abuse, the potential for terrorism and cybercrime. So there's the three key issues that apparently Britain's police now focus on. They're not interested if there's some burglary, somebody beaten up on the streets. That's not a problem. Child abuse, terrorism, and cybercrime. And remember that this was the lady who didn't particularly want to investigate Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. Her force was very quick to fail to protect the gentleman who was exposing that abuse. But she went on to say, we agreed an action plan which all forces agreed to abide by to make sure whether we are trying to prevent child abuse, pursue it, protect children, or prepare ourselves with other agencies, we also need to protect children online. So what is this, Mike? It's hypocrisy, I think, of unbelievable scale. Or is there something else going on here? They're saying that they're protecting children as a smokescreen to the fact that they absolutely aren't.
Yes.
Well, let's bring her in again. She's in uniform this time. And this is the same lady in 2017. She says we need to talk about well-being in policing. And she says this: last night I attended the annual Police Bravery Awards and celebrated officers who have performed extraordinary acts in the line of duty. How do you celebrate an officer?
Not sure.
I mean, do you have balloons and little whizzes and
These good questions.
daisy chains hung around the room or something?
Yeah.
I don't know, but she was celebrating.
Good.
And we noted that, of course, while she was doing that, this applied. So we're paraphrasing, really. Luckily, child abuse whistleblower Detective Constable John Wedger was not there. Of course, he'd have found that difficult, as we'd helped his welfare and well-being by putting him on no pay. We refused to allow him to retire on health grounds after he blew the whistle on Met Police and the political establishment cover up of child abuse. So there is no question that NPCC knows all about John Wedger, while the chair of NPCC is out celebrating officers who've performed extraordinary acts of bravery. They don't want to go near John Wedger because he's the man who's highlighted the fact that the Met Police themselves were helping to cover up the abuse of children. So I'll just end this section by saying that if you're as outraged as we are over the actions of NPCC, their own website encourages people to challenge them about what they are reporting. If you have any questions about anything in this blog or any feedback, please get in touch because of the nature of this meeting and what's discussed. So there they are. The NPCC are saying themselves, if you've any questions about what they're doing, their policy, what's going right, what's going wrong with policing, get in touch. And we say to our audience today, if you're wondering what you can do to stop what's unfolding in UK at the moment, here is a classic invitation for you to ring, text, email right into NPCC, and perhaps you might challenge the subject of John Wedger's treatment alongside any other subjects you have. Remember, of course, to be polite, reasonable in all your communication so as not to be branded vexatious and, of course, a possible red-hatted terrorist.
Yes. Okay, we're going to move on to BRIA. And if anybody doesn't know what BRIA is, of course, that's Brexit without the exit, because that's where we're at. Britain is, we've mentioned this quite some time ago, that Britain was opting into Europol, but they've signed, they are announced the signing of a new security treaty with the European Union following Brexit, and that's in order to intensify cooperation to stop the ever-growing and increasing cross-border threats. This is the 6th policy paper that they've published, a series of future partnership policy papers, as they're described, Brian. So we're exiting, but we're having a future partnership.
In the future, it will be okay. This is the futurism. It's very, very dangerous. Don't worry about all the problems now. In the future, it will all be okay.
But it's more than that, because we're future partnershiping, and this, as I say, the 6th policy paper outlining the government's vision for ties with the European Union. So not quite sure how that works. Apparently the new treaty is going to be underpinned by our shared principles and should make sure our partnership has the agility to respond to ever-changing threats we face. Now, of course, Britain has a long-standing relationship with Europol, a leading role in developing Europol. Rob Wainwright, a Brit, has been its director since 2009. We have been critical of them in the past with regard to their success rates with regard to drug trafficking and human trafficking and sex crimes, particularly on children. But this proposed treaty includes the European arrest warrant, so they don't want us to leave the European arrest warrant system. We're obviously going to stay within Europol. It also suggests that we would stay within Schengen Information System 2. That allows Britain to send and receive notifications about suspected criminals and terrorists crossing borders. We also stay within Eurojust within this document. Eurojust, established in 2002, it was set up apparently to deal with cross-border and organised crime. Now, I'm not suggesting necessarily that we shouldn't remain some kind of relationship or keep some kind of relationship with these organisations. But what's actually happening here is a series of future partnership policy papers. These are demonstrating what the the policy, what the partnership is going to be with the European Union post-BRA, because there is no exit under these circumstances. Let's have a look and see what David Davis had to say. We already have a deep level of collaboration with the EU on security matters, and it's both our interests to find ways to maintain it.
Okay.
Okay. We're going to maintain it. We're staying in.
We're staying in, and of course that's what the UK column has said consistently, that Brexit would be a psychological operation.
Yes. Okay, some ads then. Let's mention Froome Stop Wars Media on Trial event, which is happening on Thursday, the 19th of October, 7 p.m. at Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church. That's in Shaftesbury Avenue in London. John Pilger, Peter Ford, Patrick Henningsen, Vanessa Beeley, and the rest speaking at that. And Brian, you will be speaking at AV 8.1, Ian Crane's interim alternative view conference or event, which is just a single day at the Connaught Rooms in London on Sunday the 8th of October. That's 11 to 6 p.m. So get along to that if you can as well. And just a quick reminder that this Wednesday is the UK Columns monthly meeting at the George in Plimpton, 7:30 p.m. Get along to that if you can as well. So what are we talking about now? We are talking about the UN General Assembly. Now, tomorrow is when it gets interesting because Theresa May will be speaking at the UN General Assembly. But as you can see here, the CNN's coverage of this, most of the mainstream media's coverage of this, focusing on this being Donald Trump's first General Assembly meeting. He's going to be talking about Iran and North Korea, and that's all very exciting. But what's perhaps more interesting is the fact that Sergei Lavrov and Rex Tillerson have already met on the sidelines of the meeting to discuss Syria and also Ukraine. So, you know, there is activity going on there on the sidelines, which is not quite in the vein that the mainstream media would like to portray. But we'll watch what happens tomorrow when Theresa gives her talk. But in parallel with this is the Climate Week, New York.
So we've had Democracy Day, World Democracy Day, and now we're on Climate Week.
Absolutely.
It's brilliant.
So this is taking place in parallel. This apparently is one of the key international climate summits which bring together national governments, businesses and global citizens to build on the collective action on climate change. So what is a global citizen?
Well, I think a global citizen, Mike, is somebody who can help implement the global policy.
Do they get a global passport?
Well, they will do eventually, because that's definitely coming. I think this is all tied in with the leadership of people's thoughts in a particular direction, and I'll be talking about that at AV 8.1.
Okay, well, good. Okay, because this is important because the UK is a global leader in tackling climate change. Apparently, we played a vital role in negotiating the Paris Agreement, and we were the first country to introduce domestic, legally binding emission reduction targets. And this is since the Climate Change Act of 2008. Apparently, we've made all kinds of progress in this area. Well, the climate change minister is Claire Perry, and she's going to this event. And this is what she had to say: the UK is decarbonising faster than any other G20 nation, and the government, is determined to drive up the pace of decarbonisation while maximising the opportunities for economic growth. So I thought that was pretty interesting, particularly in light of to understand that statement, you've got to understand what decarbonising means. Of course, she's talking about carbon emissions.
I think she's talking about getting rid of people.
Well, it's interesting you say that because what's this all about?
Well, we've got problems in the NHS apparently. And this Telegraph article is alerting us to the fact that cut-price medics are being lured to the NHS from the US with promises of long holidays and touring Europe. And they want to get in at least 3,200 of these physician associates. So let's have a look at a bit of the details. It says that the physician associates are going to carry out minor operations and ward rounds, but they'll only have had 2 years training. So they'll be going around to see everything's okay on the wards, with just 2 years training, but they can do a few minor operations. And we need these people desperately. We certainly can't get them from UK because, of course, there's no suitable people in UK. There's no unemployed. There's no young people looking for jobs. So we've got to go to the States. And so the NHS, which hasn't got any money, is coming up with some big relocation packages to get those people to come out over from the US. And this is the sort of thing they're doing. So it's promising up to £1,000 towards relocation costs, 41 days paid holiday, because obviously you need to get that in pretty quickly. And remember, that number of days holiday will be very big because the US are very poor at giving holiday. So 41 days to an American, that's a lot. And it goes on to say, if you come to the UK, it'll be great because you can have trips or short trips overseas to other countries.
Aren't we closing our borders?
Well, don't confuse me at the moment, Mike. So you can reach most European destinations in just a few hours from London, which makes the UK a fantastic travel hub from which to explore Europe and even further afield. So we desperately need these Americans, even though they're only partially trained, to help support our NHS system, which hasn't got any money except to relocate them. But once they're here, they can go on holiday anyway, if, of course, we haven't got the borders closed as a result of Brexit without the exit.
Excellent.
It's madhouse. This is UK in 2017. And, of course, remember that the Tories have specifically said they intended to create a period of constructive chaos in Britain, and that's what we're now living. So don't say, how is this happening? The Tories have said, Tory individuals have said very clearly, this is Tory policy, and here in the NHS we've got it. But what is the real problem in the NHS? Well, it's very, very clear because, sorry, where have we gone? Let's just come back. I should have been able to highlight that for you. I'll have to read it through. Good grief. What it actually says is here, the question, why is the NHS under so much pressure? And the answer to that is an ageing population. There are 1 million more people over the age of 65 than years ago. And the inference to me is that those people have got to go because they're causing problems in the NHS. We haven't got the money to pay for them. We haven't got the pensions. They are, in fact, useless eaters, carbon-based. Time for them to go. Well, let's have a look at the NHS from another angle. And this is a report on Derriford Hospital in Plymouth. And an anonymous leak or anonymous report from doctors revealed that 2 junior doctors were left to care for more than 400 patients in the hospital during a night shift. So it says the pressures on staffing at Derriford Hospital came to light, an anonymous concern raised by a doctor who said the situation was very unsafe. Well, that seems to be a minor statement. So 2 doctors to look after 436 patients. And so what was the reply from the hospital? Well, no individual is named, so apparently the hospital building spoke for itself. But Plymouth Hospital's NHS Trust said the paper detailed what it referred to as, quote, exception reporting, which means these issues were not the norm. It took the issues of staffing and doctor recruitment seriously and was working to improve the situation. So don't worry, it didn't happen at all. I'm interested in who the boss of the hospital was. Now, the chief executive of Plymouth Hospital's NHS Trust is this lady, Anne James. I think this is the lady we should be interested in. And it's fascinating that if we have a little look at her background, she started out as a marketing manager and then went through the National Management Trainee Programme for the NHS. So I believe the inference is that she's not medically trained, but she was chosen presumably as a special leader.
Common purpose again?
It's common purpose sort of agenda. So no money in the NHS. Have we got any money at all?
Well, we're getting money from certain people for certain things because the arms trade is doing very, very well. So let's just have a look at this. So we've got 24 Typhoon jets off to Qatar because Michael Fallon was in Qatar today and with his Qatari counterpart, and they've signed a statement of intent concerning the proposed purchase of 24 Typhoon aircraft. A close and long-standing defence relationship apparently is what they have, and today's statement of intent further reinforces this, deepening military cooperation between the two and the opportunity to further enhance the security of all partners in the Gulf Cooperation Council. Apparently the UK and Qatar share mutual defence interests, including countering violent extremism. That explains why the UK and Qatar and Saudi Arabia, for that matter, financially support terrorism around the world, but anyway, that's another matter. And apparently they both enjoy ensuring peace and stability in the region. Not only will the purchase of Typhoon aircraft further strengthen this strong bilateral relationship, according to the government, it will benefit Qatar's military capability and increase security cooperation and interoperability between the UK and Qatar and other Gulf Cooperation Council partners. Michael Fallon had something to say on this. He said, after a number of years of negotiations between our two countries, I'm delighted to have been able to sign today with Qatar's Defence Minister this statement of intent on the purchase of 24 Typhoon aircraft by Qatar. Now,
So Fallon has now simply become a defence salesman.
That's absolutely right. But I was interested in what he said here. After a number of years of negotiations, so it took years of negotiations to get these 24 aircraft sold. And I just found that interesting. Why was Qatar sort of not chomping at the bit? And then I sort of thought to myself, well, maybe this had something to do with it because, of course, since June, Qatar has been in crisis. And that crisis has been mainly driven by Saudi Arabia, Britain's lapdog of choice in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Bahrain, if you remember rightly, had severed relations with Qatar on the 5th of June. And they gave Qatari citizens, Saudis gave Qatari citizens 14 days to get out of the country. They also told their own citizens that they had to get out of Qatar. And so all this angst has been built up from Saudi Arabia at Qatar. Neither country is in any better position with regard to terrorist financing. So for Saudi Arabia to say we're doing this because Qatar has been financing terrorism is absolutely nuts. So all this angst has been built up, and then suddenly Qatar agrees to buy a bunch of aircraft from us.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? This is also the same Qatar that is sort of named by people who are saying the money coming in for the extremist mosques is coming partly from Qatar. And with the mosque comes an extreme imam. And we're very confident on talking about this because reports are coming from within the Muslim community of UK. So we're seeing extremism partly built up with the Qatari money, but the defence minister who's fighting terrorism is quite happy because we're helping to arm the Qataris.
It's not a problem. It's not a problem. We're hiring an extremism commissioner. It's not a problem.
Well, there we are. Sometimes it's very difficult to present the news in UK because it's so utterly bizarre, or it seems to be what's happening. But of course, if you work through events, we can see that something very deeply sinister is now starting to take over power in UK. And it's up to the wider general public to stop that happening as fast as possible. How can you do that? Spread the news, spread the information, and warn family, friends, and everybody you can possibly speak to. That's it for today. Thank you for joining us. If you're not a subscriber for UK Column, please consider taking out a subscription or making a donation, because we can only do what we do with your help. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.